Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking your time to come to our webinar series. This is the first of what should be a whole long series of Microsoft-related technology that we're going to be talking about. My name is Mike O'Neill, and I am the Senior Director Evangelist of Microsoft Technologies. It's a big, long title. Basically, I'm an ex-Microsoft employee. I was there for over 18 years. I did both senior technical roles as well as sales roles, as well as consulting. Most people at Microsoft know me because I was involved in building the seminar team. So if you've ever been to a MSDN or TechNet or TS2 event or any of those small business events, those were all my teams that were out there. I did that for about 12 years. And then I retired in 2008, and I've been helping organizations build up their Microsoft practice. Finally, I got a call and met with the owner of Fuji, who convinced me that they're doing some wonderful Microsoft work, and I got really excited and I joined up. I also have Veronica on the line. Veronica, do you want to turn on your webcam and say hi to everyone and just tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Nice to see everyone. So I am Veronica Malika, and I'm VP of Sales for Fuji. I joined a couple of months ago, and my background is in cybersecurity and technology recruiting. I had my own firm for, let's see, 18 years, and the last 6 years I was focused exclusively in security sales replacement. So I'm working here at Fuji on our cloud and cybersecurity solutions, quality engineering, low code, no code, and staff aug. So thank you for joining us.
Very good. Veronica is going to be helping me, as I said, because we're now up to almost 20 people. We're going to keep the microphones muted, but I want this to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to hopefully have you use your chat windows to ask questions or comments. Veronica is going to be watching those, and she's going to alert me so I can answer questions or read out a comment or whatever the case may be. It's hard to get interactivity when it's kind of a one-way, but I know you just don't want to hear me talk for 90 minutes or more. So we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. Let's get going. I'm going to go ahead and click to my next slide. I want to point out Fuji, but we spell it with an E, and it really is about the mountain in Japan. Our owner went to Japan, and he was just mesmerized by this mountain. It says it's the most majestic, beautiful thing in the world. And I'm going to tell a little story on myself. This is absolutely true. I kept thinking, why is this thing so beautiful? Every picture I look at, it's just phenomenally gorgeous. And I'm like, maybe it's the pagoda, or maybe it's the cherry blossoms that you see here. You always see those in these kind of pictures. And I realized, no, it's the mountain itself that's so dynamic. And it finally dawned on me the other day why this is. And I'm going to give you a hint, and then I'm going to see if anyone using the chat window can guess why this mountain is so amazingly majestic. Here is a picture of Mount Everest, right? You see the little dot here. This is actually a rendering from Google Earth, but that is Mount Everest. And yeah, it's impressive. It's actually twice the size of Mount Fuji. It's more than twice the size of Mount Fuji, but I don't think it's quite as picturesque. And the question becomes, why do we think Fuji is so beautiful? Why do you think people are so drawn to it, flock to it? And I don't know if anyone's entered the chat session or not. It's perfectly okay, but I'll tell you why. The answer is, and this didn't dawn on me until just this week, literally, I just thought of this and I looked it up, and sure enough, it's because Mount Fuji is a volcano, and it's out in the middle of nothing. This is a photo that was actually taken from the space station, and you can see there is nothing around it. So whenever you see a picture of Mount Fuji, it's out there by itself, and that's why it stands out. It's so amazingly majestic. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Today, we're going to be talking about Power BI, and in particular, I'm going to be demoing Power BI. I'm going to be showing you lots of great stuff. But in particular, we're going to be talking about how this tool is starting to evolve into a powerful reporting tool that Microsoft is intending to basically be the reporting tool for Windows. Okay. Some of you follow me on LinkedIn. I know I did a post on this the other day, and I had someone post back and say, well, be careful because Power BI can be expensive and SSRS is not dead, and you know, kind of threw out those concerns. The interesting thing is the person that posted, I don't think he realized who I was, and I didn't realize who he was when I responded. We both worked with each other back at Microsoft for about 8 years. He was there for about 8 years. Anyway, he brought up some very valid points. His name's Brian Paul. He's an excellent SQL specialist, and he owns his own company. And his point about, you know, it being too expensive or whatever, I understand where he's coming from, and I understand the resistance that a lot of people are going to have in giving up SSRS, right? Many people have spent time learning this and really investing their time and effort and understanding how to make these beautiful reports. And now we're telling them, wait a minute, Microsoft's shifting directions and going an entirely different way. From the cost perspective, realize people will say, well, SSRS is free. SQL Server reporting services is what I'm talking about. And it's been the basic reporting tool for a long time at Microsoft. Well, it's not free. We used to use an expression in Microsoft, it's free like a free puppy, right? It seems like it's free, but once you get the puppy home, you have to pay the vet bills, and you have to give it a crate, and you have to buy food, and you have to get it shots, and it becomes a very expensive endeavor. SQL Server reporting services is the same. It's licensed with SQL Server. So although it seems like it's free, you have to buy a SQL Server license. And in some cases, depending on how many cores and all that good stuff, it can be from $1,200 all the way up to about $7,000. So I understand where Brian was coming from. I do agree that sometimes the pricing for Power BI can get expensive when you start getting into Pro and Premium and you're licensing per user. But it's the same thing. SSRS was not free. It was part of a much bigger license. And this is just a natural evolution of the way Microsoft's going. Hopefully this will make more sense as I go through this today. I do have a poll just to kind of work with all of you and see where your experience level is. So this first one, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And if you can answer for me, I'm just trying to say, what is your experience level with Power BI? I want to know if you're brand new to it, if you've played around with it, or you've actually been using it in production, or maybe you know DAX and you know M code and you are deep, deep, deep into Power BI. So it looks like most of you are in that limited deal, 67% limited, a couple more coming into the sum. Not a whole lot in the lot. It looks like I have one super advanced user. Good for you. And that gives me an idea of kind of where your experience level is. So I'll be sure to kind of make sure I talk to all these different levels. I am going to, I'll close that poll out real quick. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I try to make these webinars everywhere from a level 100 to a 300. So I don't want anyone to be bored. If you are a level 300 user, I don't want you to be bored just, you know, doing basic stuff. So I try to break it into a 25%, 65%, or 60%, 15%. So I got a little bit for the beginners, a whole lot for the intermediates, and quite a little bit, but some for the advanced users. I put on this second slide, I hate PowerPoints as much as you do. And this is interesting. I put 80% of the topics covered today are going to be demo, demo, demo. Normally, those of you that have followed me, and I know I see some names for those of you that have been to my previous webinars, normally I say 95%. That's how much I hate using PowerPoints. Today, those are a little different. I lowered the number because I really need to explain what's happening behind the scenes. My goal here today is to not do the same webinar that you can get from every other partner in the world, where I just show you click steps and do this. I want you to understand the big concept of why Microsoft is doing what it is. When I was at Microsoft, I mentioned I was a technical person, but I was what was called a Microsoft generalist. I didn't learn one specific product. My job was to learn all of the products, and more importantly, how those products hook together. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is how those products hook together. What is Microsoft doing in getting rid of SSRS? I shouldn't say getting rid of, but obfuscating, kind of pushing it to the background and trying to move people into Power BI. Why are they making this an integrated system? I want you to understand those back-end connections so you can appreciate better what Microsoft's trying to do. And understand, I'm not selling Power BI. I don't have any motivation here whatsoever to push one technology or another. I'm just helping customers understand where this all kind of fits into the Microsoft ecosystem. So you're going to hear me focus on why a whole lot more than the what or the how or follow these steps. This is really a strategic training that I'm trying to do. Lastly, but not leastly, I hate bait and switch and customers that, we say, hey, we're going to do a technical seminar, and that turns out to be a sales seminar. I would not do that to you. I literally have like 2 slides that I'll go through. Maybe I have 3, but I'll go through them in a matter of minutes, and then we're going to have about 87 minutes of technical bliss with as many questions as you guys can possibly ask. I don't mind being interrupted. I actually encourage it. I've always hated when professional presenters say, hold your questions to the end. And then what they do is they make sure they go long and say, oh, sorry, we didn't have time. Right? I want as many questions as you can. So make sure you use that chat window, tee those questions up. Veronica is very good at interrupting me. So she'll jump in and she'll say, hey, we have a issue or we have a question. And I'll be glad to stop and answer those and make sure we get those to you. Okay, so that's kind of the ground rules of what this is. You're going to have a chance to tell me if this was valuable at the end of today. There will be a short poll. I think it's 3 questions. It'll take you less than 2 minutes to do, but you'll tell me, hey, was this good content? Did you enjoy it? And it helps us make sure that we keep delivering good quality to you. Okay, here's the 3 minutes on who Fuji is. Let's just get this out of the way, the sales stuff. Fuji is a technical solution provider. We do quite a lot of technical consulting, implementation, development work. We have 3 locations. We are headquartered, and we are a US-based company. We're headquartered out of Dallas, Texas. We have about 100 people in and around the Dallas area. We also have offices in India. We have about 350 in an offshore. And we also have about 150 and growing in Costa Rica, and that's our nearshore operations. We use nearshore in Costa Rica, because Costa Rica has some really great talent, highly educated people. They don't have thick accents. They're easy to understand. They can provide support for the US in the same time zone. So Costa Rica is actually in the US Central Time Zone. Makes it very easy when we do managed services to do that as a provider. We really focus on 4 key areas: digital security and analytics and cloud. And this is going to be important here as we talk about this. We provide technical services, consulting, staffing, and professional training around these 4 areas. So whether it's product engineering, low code, no code, whether you're migrating to your cloud or you want some managed services, anything related to cybersecurity, and certainly the analytics stuff that we're going to be talking about, data visualization, data engineering. This is our specialty. And my last sales slide, and then we're done, is how is Fuji different? We do have deep support for multiple technologies. I've worked at partners that are like, oh yeah, we do AWS, and they didn't have anyone on staff that does AWS. Fuji's the opposite, right? They hired an 18-year veteran of Microsoft to run their Microsoft business. That's what I do. We have AWS specialists. We have Google specialists. We just brought on an Oracle specialist who wants to do a bunch of Oracle. And the answer is not yet. We're not going to get there, because the second thing I want to talk about here is we stay in our swim lane. What does that mean? When you're an Olympic swimmer, you cannot be wavering off and interfering with other people on other sides. And so we call it stay in your swim lane. Know what you're good at and go do that. And I've been at so many partnerships, the vast majority of them, where the customer says, hey, do you do CRM? Do you do accounting solutions? Do you do this, that, or that? And oftentimes the partners are like, yeah, we do that. And the technical people look and like, what are you talking about? We don't have anyone on staff that does that. But they want the business so bad that they agree to go do things that are not in their swim lane. Fuji doesn't do that. What impressed me most when I came for my interview is they're like, look, this is what we do. These are the core areas, and we're not wavering from that. Eventually, we may add more once we build up our skill set, but we will never volunteer for work that we don't know what we're doing, because it's just going to go bad. And I've been at some organizations where it went bad. So these 4 areas are the same 4 that I just showed you. I mentioned quality engineering, test, UI development, technical staffing. We've been doing that for 8 years now, and super successful part of our business. And then we're adding professional training. And the last thing I'll say about this, professional training, we're not a quote unquote professional training organization. I've been training for 30 years. I guarantee I can blow your mind with some amazing training. And I've been doing that on and on for a very long time. My point here, though, is that's not our core specialty. We do training not to be a training organization. We do training to help people deploy the solutions that we help them build. So many times, again, partners will build these huge, expensive solutions, hand it over to the customer and say, good luck. And that's no good, right? Then they're just left, how do we use it and what do we do? We provide training to help break down any roadblocks that prevent people from being productive and being able to use this technology from day one. So even though it's not the core part of what we do, it's a very important service that we add to our engineering and staffing and consulting that helps customers get it. And then the last thing, we believe in the give before we get. And what does that mean? It means nothing's worse than a partner calling you up and saying, hey, you don't know me and you don't know my company, but you should give me all your business, right? We believe the opposite. We believe we should go out there and we should give as much as possible to our customers, let them know what we can do, what our specialties are, what knowledge we have. And then once we build that rapport, hopefully we can win back your business. With that in mind, let me show you this. This is the next quarter of webinars that I'm going to be doing, totally free, every Tuesday, one right after another. I tried to color coordinate these. So you can see Power BI right now is in the yellow. Today we're going to talk about reporting. On the 28th of February, I'm going to do a whole thing on executive dashboards and how to do some of the really beautiful graphic renderings and what makes a good dashboard and what you shouldn't do. That's the most important thing. People put a lot of junk in there. We'll talk about how to clean that up. March 21st, I'm going to talk about the artificial intelligence built into Power BI and how you can use it to find anomalies, do some amazingly cool stuff. And then in April 11th, I'm going to get into DAX formulas. This is the deeper, this is the level 300 stuff, where we'll talk about how you could build your own formulas, how you can extend out the functionality that's in Power BI. So here's just 4 webinars that I'm going to be doing, always for free. If you like this one, come back and sign up to these other ones. And then I'm also doing governance with Azure. I'm doing Power Apps and Power Automate, the whole Power Platform. That's part of our low code, no code. And we'll even be doing some security webinars too. So we'll be glad to send this out and share it with you. And hopefully not only will you come, but you'll invite some others in your organization to be a part of this. By the way, if you saw something today that you really love and you come back and say, oh, I wish I could have had my boss on this, or I wish my team could have seen this, talk to Veronica. She can actually schedule a special session, free session for your organization. We're more than happy to do that because these contents will roll. So once this quarter is over, we'll repeat it for the second quarter, the third quarter, the fourth quarter. That means you might have to wait 3 months for the session to come back. So if you're interested in doing it sooner than that, talk to Veronica, shoot her your information, and she can follow up and make sure that we get you scheduled for that. That would be fine. Okay, that's it for sales. The rest of this is technical. I want to talk first, kind of the big picture stuff about, and I guess I should pause for a second. Veronica, we're doing okay. I don't have my chat window open, and I should. My apologies.
Yeah, we're good. No questions yet.
Okay. I really would like my chat window, but I buried it somewhere on my screen. Okay. You'll alert me when that happens. So,
I will be happy
to get going, let's dive into this. Remember, I want you to understand the why, and I'm bringing the why from not only 18 years of working at Microsoft, but since I've left Microsoft keeps coming back and bringing me back as a contractor. And I was actually a contractor with Microsoft just less than a year ago. I was delivering Azure Cloud Adoption Framework not webinars. These were full-day workshops for Microsoft. I did about 50 of them, and we were going to actually expand that out to about 200. So still very much in touch with Microsoft. I work with them all the time. To understand why Microsoft is looking at Power BI as the new reporting thing, it helps to start with Power BI's biggest competitor, which is a product called Tableau. And the first thing I want to tell you about Tableau is it's awesome. I am not going to bash Tableau in any way, shape, or form. It was kind of the originator. Their product came out in 2003, and Microsoft really didn't even start working on Power BI until about the well, you could say 2007, but more likely about 2009, 2010, when they started adding into Excel these little add-ons that ultimately became Power BI. Power BI as a product didn't even exist until 2016. So it took Microsoft a little while to get out there. So Tableau, fantastic product, same concept, drag and drop visuals, low code, no code, give the power of analytics to business users instead of having this whole development staff that's bogged down with all these requests. And they did a great job. As I said, they were formed in 2003. But here's the interesting thing. In 2016, Microsoft decides to rip out Power BI from Excel and make it its own product. Now, that's perfectly fine. It was all the analytic tools kind of bundled together, makes total sense. But what's fascinating is in 2018, Microsoft moved Power BI out of the Office suite entirely. They wanted to completely cut the ties back to Excel. You think of Excel, if you want, as the granddaddy of Power BI or the father of Power BI. They wanted to break that relationship. And what they did is they moved Power BI into the Dynamics family of products. If you're not familiar, Dynamics is Microsoft's CRM, all their accounting systems, all their big enterprise business solution tools fall in the Dynamics product line. This may seem like a minor move, but this was a major, major move. You say, well, why would you do that? It has to do with data, it has to do with charting and graphing, something that Excel is very, very good at. Well, here's our first clue as to why Microsoft's doing this. It's because they want it to be more than an analytic tool. And that's where we're going with this whole reporting thing. The interesting counter to this is Tableau was then acquired by Salesforce in 2019. So Salesforce.com bought Tableau. It was its own independent product. And again, fantastic product. Salesforce bought it. And the reason they bought it for $15.7 billion was because they wanted that reporting capability to counter Microsoft's moving of Power BI over into the Dynamics package. If you move Power BI over into Dynamics, suddenly CRM and the ERP and Exapta and all those Great Plains, all the accounting solutions, everything have this amazingly cool reporting tool. And Salesforce realized that they were going to pale in comparison. So their acquisition of Tableau was a way to bring over a really good reporting service tool into the Salesforce.com to counter what Microsoft was doing. Hopefully this is all kind of making sense to you. So with that being the case, I also have an interesting little trivia question here, which will kind of extend this story. So how many developers do you think currently work on Microsoft Excel? I just used Excel, but it's the same number for Word, it's the same number for PowerPoint. So we went up to Microsoft and we walked in onto a meeting. And by the way, I literally have done this. I met the entire Excel team because I knew the product manager. How many developers are sitting in that room? And I'm going to launch a poll here and just take a guess what you think the answer is. So I'm going to launch. Is it 10, 50, 100, 500, or 1,000? Take your guess. And see a couple of you, got a couple in the 10, a couple in the 50. Boy, we got them all over the place. So give me just a second more. It looks like the winner right now is over 1,000. 32% of you said over 1,000 people. Surprisingly, the answer is, drum roll please, 10. Usually there's between 8 and 12, so I averaged it to 10. And I thought, like all of you, I thought there were thousands of people working on those products. They aren't. They keep those developer teams really, really small. But here's the interesting thing. I don't have the new number, so I'm using the number back from 2019, just a couple years ago. The Power BI team at Microsoft, just the Power BI team, had 287 developers working on it versus 10 working on Excel and Word and PowerPoint and everything else. So what I tell customers is, and by the way, I think it's well over that now. It's over like 300. When we launch the product, which we'll be doing here in just a second, you're going to see that there are constant updates, literally monthly, coming to the Power BI tool. And the reason they're happening so frequently is because they have 300 developers currently working on this. I tell my customers, follow the money. If you want to know what technology is hot, if you want to know what's going to be the next biggest, hottest thing, go where Microsoft is putting their money and where they're hiring their development staff. Power BI has a 10x size of team over all the other core Microsoft products. They're really putting their investment dollars and information in there. So I appreciate those of you that are playing, the 9% of you that picked 10, take a bow because you got it right. But I thought that was an interesting stat. We would think they would be much, much bigger, but they're usually kept really small. Power BI is massive. It's a huge development team, and it keeps growing and growing. So we'll keep that in mind as we get there. So what does all this work for? I'm almost done with my slides. Bear with me just a few minutes more. Power BI, ripped out of Office, not in the Office product anymore, now in the Dynamics, is part of this quinfecta, I guess is what you call it, of technology in the Power Platform world. Power Platform is the bundling of all these packages together. And the packages are part of a new effort that Microsoft has called low code, no code. And we're going to talk a lot about this. Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Pages. Microsoft ripped off the Apple branding of iCloud and iThis and iThat and everything else. They went with the word Power, and everything now has the Power preview on it. That all fits under this Power Platform. These applications sit, and this is really important, on top of these universal services that you see down at the bottom. So think of it as at the bottom, I have my services, and then the apps sit on top and they pull from these services. Every single one of these apps can pull from a common set of data connectors. I'm going to show you this live in a second. They pull from all the AI libraries. I'm doing a special Power BI version of how it reaches into AI. And they also pull from this thing called the Dataverse. It's a new database format. It's an open standard supported by the industry. Microsoft calls this the Dataverse, and basically it's a relational database. It's cheaper, it's easier to use, it's very, very powerful, and most importantly, it has a common naming structure where your organization may use the word mobile phone and mine uses a cell phone, and someone calls it a zip code or a postal code or a mailing code. You have all these different nomenclatures. All the big industry groups got together and they basically standardized, and they said, we're all going to call it this one thing. By doing that, it makes your data be able to move between any application, not just Microsoft, but Oracle and Sybase and DB2 and everything else out there that supports this new standard. Now the data can flow completely independently across without translation tables and all these kind of issues and problems that we might have. Again, I'll pause for just a second, see if there's any questions. If anything I'm saying, if you have a question, please use that chat window. Hopefully you all see on the side, there's this little chat breakout. You can click on it and you can post a question. And again, Veronica will call me out on that. So I'm assuming there's no questions. I'll keep going.
Not yet. Yep, keep going.
Okay. By the way, this Power Pages, some of you may be surprised to see that. That's brand new. What is Power Pages? Everything that was designed previously was this was replacing SharePoint Designer and InfoPath, which had been in the market forever. They were SharePoint solutions. Microsoft went to the Power Platform because they wanted to break away from SharePoint. It still works beautifully with SharePoint, but they want to be able to host these on Apple devices and Android devices and every device out there. So what they did was they created the same kind of functionality, but they built it into a web browser. And by building it into a web browser, now I can use Safari if I'm in the Apple world, or I can use any of the browsers out in the Android world, and it still works beautifully. It's a universal forms designer, business routing system, business rules processing, etc. The problem is, just as SharePoint was, those were all internal facing. And what customers wanted was the ability to take these solutions and post them out to their customers. Maybe I want a form, maybe I'm an electric company, and I want people out on the internet who use my services to be able to tell me if they have an outage. So they fill out a form saying, hey, I need help, my power's out or whatever. Power Pages is external facing, web facing solutions that can bridge from the external internet traffic out and bring it back into my intranet inside my organization. and allow me then to run these rules and forms and everything else that we're doing. So just want to point that out because that's relatively brand new. All right. Last thing and last poll that I have is to explain this problem that I see all the time. I'm talking to customers. Veronica and I are actually may have a meeting here within the next week, probably up in New York, where we're going to be going and talking to an existing customer about this. This organization is a chemical company, and they've acquired a bunch of other organizations, and now they've got just tons of problems because the other systems use different technology, and now they've got all these mixed up standards and everything else under the sun. In this particular case, just so you know, this may not be your problem, but this is a huge problem for most organizations. When the COVID pandemic hit, plans that were 4 years in the making, right? They had plans that in 4 years, we're going to evolve and we're going to let people work from home or coffee shops. We're going to set up this support. All of a sudden, those got shrunk down to 4 weeks. Everyone panicked. Everyone's home. IT departments had to scramble like crazy, and they turned to the cloud in order to do this. The problem is that they were working so hard to just support the pandemic, and they did an amazing job, but they got huge backlogs based on people asking for custom reports and people asking for custom applications and whatnot. And in most cases, even today, when I talk to organizations, most of these developer teams have like a 2-year backlog of requests for either reports or custom apps or whatever it is they're working on. They just cannot get caught up. The demand gets bigger. I could go out and buy or hire a bunch more developers, but you all know right now it's a terrible time, right? Developers are very high dollar. There's very few of them. There's not enough supply. You got to fight hard, not only to get them, but to keep them. And most organizations just can't do that. So what's happened is you have this developer wall. You have business users that say, hey, I need a report, and I need it to look this way, and I need it to have these colors, and I need it to lay out the data, and could you go please make that? And the developers say, yeah, I'll get to it in 6 months or whenever, when the backlog's up. They finally get to it, they program something out, they throw it back over the wall, and the business user says, no, this isn't what I wanted. It's been a while, let me explain this again. And they keep going around in this circle. Could you change this? Could you add this? I don't like this, what about this? And this process becomes anywhere, according to Gartner and IBM and a bunch of others who studied this could be upwards of 6 to 8 months of just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So we have a problem. Our developers are swamped. There's this huge backlog of requests. They're not happy. They can't make people happy because they're so backlogged. The business users are not happy. They know how they want it to look. They know what they need, but they have to sit there and they're at the mercy of the developers. This is where low code, no code comes in. And so what happened is Microsoft, as well as a bunch of other organizations, turned to low code, no code and tried to use drag and drop technology and simple connections of data. This is what Power BI is when we take a look at it here in a second. But they tried to put all this stuff together so the business users could do 90% of the work. They're not going to be able to create a finished product, but they will be able to lay out all the pieces, get the colors looking right, make sure it looks exactly the way they want to use it. And if they can get 90% of the work, then they turn to the developers and say, could you just do this 10%, lock together all the data connectors and make sure all the data flows right? They do the 10%, and suddenly that backlog that's 2 years long shrinks down to just 2 weeks. This is a huge solution, and it allows business users to become what Microsoft calls citizen developers. They have no development experience, they have no programming experience, but they're capable of doing the work. And the best part is they can do it exactly the way they want it to do. They want it to look and how they want it to act using these drag and drop capabilities without this continuous loop of feedback going back and forth and back and forth. So I have one more poll that I want to share. And this is just asking you about your own developer backlog. Don't worry, we're not using this for sales or anything, but I just want to see if you all seen the same thing. If you went to your developers and asked for a custom app to be built or custom reports, how long would it take them to do that? Is it days, weeks, months, years, or you're not even allowed to do anything? I've had a couple people say, we just don't even accept requests anymore. Looks like most of you were within weeks, so that's good news. about a 50-50. A couple of you are in days. That's even better. So still kind of across the spectrum. Usually the larger the organizations, the bigger the backlog tends to be. That's not always the case, but in some cases that typically is. So it looks like 36% within weeks, 36% within months, 8% within years. I'm a little surprised. Usually it's the backlog's a little bit bigger. So maybe this is a sign that they're starting to catch up. But the intention here is by using this citizen developer low code method, we can speed this whole process up. So thank you for your responses. I appreciate that. It's really good feedback. I'm going to close that out. Okay. All right, it's demo time. So this is the last slide I believe I have, which is Microsoft's doing citizen developers. They can go out and unlock data, automate processes. They can do all this stuff with simple drag and drop. They can get about 80 to 90% of all the code written just using this low code, no code concept. Then they turn it over to the pro developers who just work on that last 10%. This is your traditional IT programmers. And then you have your IT pros who are on the backside. They're making sure the database is up and running, that the connections work, they're doing all this together. So the three of these groups of people will work together to make that backlog shorter, be able to generate new custom apps very, very quickly. And again, using this concept I was talking about with Microsoft, getting out of just a SharePoint world, they're now able to take this out to Android, they're able to take it out to Apple, to iMac, to pretty much everything out there in the universe. As long as it has a browser, you have access to all this great Microsoft stuff. And I'll be showing you that here today. Okay, let's just go to demo and let's get in. So the rest of this, that was much longer than I normally do, but I kind of need to take you on that journey so you understand. I'm gonna go ahead and launch Power BI. And I'm gonna be using Power BI Desktop. If you're not familiar, Power BI comes in your Office subscription. If you have an E3 or E5 or even an E1, you get access to Power BI. It comes in the online version. So if I go out to my Microsoft Office portal, portal.office.com, you'll see Power BI listed, assuming someone in my organization has assigned me a license. There is a free version that comes with every version of Office. So just to get started, you get a free version. And the free version can do just amazing analytics and do most of everything I'm going to show you today. It can do. The limitation is it does it for you. The second you want to share your report out to others, or you want others to be able to interact with your data, then Microsoft's going to say you need what's called a pro license or a premium license. And that's where they're going to charge a per user per month fee on top of that. Now, you don't have to do that for everyone in your organization. We recommend that you do that for select groups. I want my boss to have one because I want my boss to be able to see and play with the data, but not everyone needs every single license. And the free one will get you very, very far. When you load up Power BI, this is what I was talking about, those 300 plus developers working on it, is they are constantly making changes to this product, literally, in most cases, at least once a month, in many cases, 2 times a month, with major feature updates and everything else. And you know this because right from the front, you'll see this what's new section, okay? I'm not gonna go through all this. The idea isn't to train you on everything. There's great videos that you can look at. Microsoft has some amazing training. They have samples, videos, you name it. But this what's new section is important for 2 reasons. It keeps you up to date. So this is what's new in the December version, December of 2022. And when you look down this, I mean, they changed a lot. There's reporting, modeling, data connectivity, service, mobile, on and on. And you can go in here and you can see just incredible amounts of changes that they've added or improved or modified or whatever the case may be. And it's all described out here in detail so you can see. Just to show you, if I go look, every single month, here's January of 2023. So this was December. Let's look at the latest one. And here you go, announcing embedding Power BI organizational apps in Microsoft Teams. I'm actually going to show you this today. Backups, size limitation changes, you name it. This is what happens when you get 300 people working every single month to improve a product. This is a plus, and this is a minus. Why is it a minus? Be very careful when you build reports. If you're constantly updating, just like if you were a programmer using C# or working in one of the different languages in Java or whatever the case may be, changes made to the back end can affect the work you're doing on the front end. So what we tell people is, hey, if everything's working fine, just because they have new features, if you're not going to use those features, you don't need to upgrade every single month. I would recommend about every 3 months, go ahead and install the latest version. Because again, every month they're coming out with a new patch. But what you don't want to do is get all your reports ready and everything's great. You have this amazing scorecard for your boss, and suddenly you upgrade to the new version and Microsoft has turned off some of the features they had previously because they made a new way of doing this, and suddenly your entire dashboard doesn't work. Microsoft doesn't do this quite so much. In the early days, they were doing it a lot. I had disastrous times when I would upgrade and half my stuff wouldn't work anymore. Less of that today, but still something to be careful. So use this forum as a way to stay up to date on what's changing. If you see something that's really important, it's related to what you need to do, go ahead and do that update. That's fine. But you don't have to update every single month, every time Microsoft comes out with a new version. Skip a few, do it every 3 months or so, and you'll be just fine. Okay? So keep that in mind. Again, tons of resources in my goal to go through those today. We're almost 45 minutes in, so I really want to get into some of this demo. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to connect to our data. And there's a really important thing I want to explain when we talk about data, so you understand. So I said, go to my data, and I want to jump back 2 seconds to my slides just to point this out right here, that what we're doing right now is we're opening up this library of data connectors. The data connectors you see in Power BI are the data connectors that you see for Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. They're actually the same data connectors for Excel and Word and everything else. Microsoft is making a universal set of these connectors that'll work with all of their technology, okay? So when I said in Power BI, hey, I want to go get some data, I'm looking at these data connectors, and these connectors are constantly being updated. I told you every single month you're going to have new updates come out, and there'll be new data connectors in there. Almost every one of the major brand data connectors out there are in the product. So you're going to see obviously Microsoft related stuff like an Excel workbook, but you're going to see Oracle, you're going to see IBM DB2, you're going to see MySQL. All of Microsoft's competitors' connectors are in here as well. So if I scroll down this, you see I'm scrolling, I'm barely out of the A's. Here's the Dynamics, here's SharePoint, here's Exchange, and they've broken them down to make them easier. Here's all the file related ones. And notice, by the way, PDF is a format. If I have a PDF, I can use it as a data source for Power BI. I can go out to my online services. This is Facebook. This is Google Analytics. This is every service out there. And if you want to, I can, like I said, tie it into Facebook, and I can pull data showing how many people reposted my tweets, how many read a certain posting, how many, figuring out all the relationships. It'll suck that data across in any way, shape, or form. And there's hundreds of these things in here. One more that I really want to point out, because I use this a lot, there's a web connector. Well, what does that mean? That means if you need to get data, and that data is publicly available out on the web, let's say like the weather, right? The NOAA and the US Weather Service post out all the temperatures and rainfalls and everything else. And this is actually true. I was on a case where a construction company was falling way behind on road construction that they were doing. And their argument, this was in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin, and their argument was, we can't pour concrete when it's raining. It's just, you can't do it. And they said, we've had unusual weather. And of course, the parent company was like, well, it's been raining, but it's not that much. I had to go to NOAA and pull the weather for the exact zip code where this construction project was. We threw it into Power BI, So what this web connector does is allows you to go to any page, grab the tables and data off of the page, it scrapes it and sucks it right back into Power BI. And so I was able to grab all the weather for this particular zip code, do my analysis in Power BI, and turns out it was really rainy in Round Rock, Texas, and they were 100% correct. It was an act of God that's why this thing was falling behind. So it wasn't the construction company's fault. You can do this with anything. If you're a football fan or a sports fan, go to ESPN. You can grab data right off of the ESPN pages. I know a lot of people that are doing fantasy football, and they scrape those pages all the time, and they do their advanced analysis and everything else. Just to let you know that's in there, and it's very cool. And there's tons more. Any service, any popular service that you've seen out there generally has a connector ready to go. You just got to find it and experiment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and load up data that I have from an Excel workbook. And I'm just using Excel. It works the same way as if this was SQL Server or Oracle or anything else. I've created a table in Excel, and this table has 1 million records. I didn't want a small database. I wanted something huge. Now, I'm not going to take you through all the things that I'm doing here, but what it's doing is it's attached to the Excel table, and it has these table names. These are pages in my Excel spreadsheet, and I want these 4 right here. These are from a shoe store, a fictional shoe store that I created. And you're going to see how we're going to be able to relate these tables and make these work together as a relational database. Excel is a flat file database, meaning that it just produces things in tables. But from an efficiency standpoint, when we convert it over, we want to make it a relational database. So I'll take a second to show you how to do that. But if I go in here and look like this relational table, and I scroll, I can see the actual data. It's in the preview, it's truncating this, so it's just giving me a sample. But when I load it up, I'll get almost 1 million records will come across. Now, here's the important thing. You've heard this term before, ETL, extract, transform, and load. And what it means is proper data analytic tools have ETL services. They can extract the data out of any source. That's what my data connectors do. But most importantly, they can transform the data. And I want to take a minute to make sure everyone understands, because this is probably the most critical thing of what Power BI is doing. This is also going to be really beneficial when we talk about the reporting services in just a second. I'm going to transform the data. If I hit load, it would just load it into my model and I'm ready to start working with it. But almost every single time we work with data, something is always screwed up in the data. No one has perfect data. And I need to go clarify some things. It's like I said, I don't call it a postal code, I call it a zip code. That's the term we use in the United States. I don't call it a mobile phone, I call it a cell phone. So I want to make those changes. I want to relate the data in different ways. I want to massage and manage that data. So what I can do when I do this is instead of loading it, I'm going to bring it into this other world and I'm going to transform it, meaning I'm going to make changes to the core database. So when I say transform, watch what happens. I'm in Power BI, but suddenly this other app pops up called Power Query. Now remember, this was an add-in into Excel. So Power Query started in Excel as an interface to go out and get your data. But there's something really special that's happening as we do this. So I'm going to show you this in a second, but I want to describe it for you using some animation. Hopefully it'll make this clearer. Let me go back into presentation mode here, and let me switch these. Okay, so traditionally what happens is I've got an enterprise database. This could be my Oracle or SQL Server or some big, huge, monstrous database where I keep all of my data. And I've had these pro developers that have been out there and writing code. They are trained on enterprise databases. They understand what they're doing. But now we have these citizen developers that want access too, because they want to be able to get in there and do stuff. And to the horror of every pro developer, they're like, don't let them in. They're going to screw things up. And there's many stories of people who didn't know what they were doing, removing a table from their query and not realizing they just removed the table from the database entirely. I mean, literally wiped out, 17 years worth of back data because they didn't know what they were doing. So it is not surprising pro developers get really sketchy when you talk about people who don't have years of experience and training accessing that enterprise database. This is a bad idea. So here is Mark and here's Shannon, and they both want to work on this enterprise data. And if I let them go, there's a good chance something's going to get really messed up, because Mark, he's from the US, so he calls things a zip code. Shannon is over in Britain and they call it a postal code. The devs like to call it a mailing code. What everyone's fighting. And the second Mark comes in and renames that piece of information, he blows up every report that everyone else did, because they're all using that same shared data source. So the second that Mark takes postal code and renames it to zip code, all those other reports can get messed up and goofed up, and all the macros and everything just kind of come to a grinding halt. So you have to be super protective of that enterprise data. You got to make absolutely sure that only people who know what they're doing are doing it. Well, so here comes Microsoft, and they're like, we're going to let citizen developers get out there and start working on this. So what Microsoft has done, same scenario, here's Mark down at the bottom, and he needs to report to his boss, Shannon, on what's going on. When he loads Power BI, which he's doing right here, Power BI is going to make a call out, just like you saw it do a second ago, to this thing called Power Query. Power Query is a separate application. It lives outside of Power BI. Now they're integrated together, but understand it's outside of Power BI. It is not Power BI. It's called by Power BI, but it lives outside. This also makes sense because if you use this in Excel or you use this in any of the other applications, they can call out to this third-party program, Power Query, and use the same functionality. So Microsoft didn't force you to use Power BI to get to Power Query. They made it as its own separate application, and Power BI, calls Power Query when it needs to get data. And Power Query then says, okay, which of these data connectors do you want to use? You saw me say Excel. It then connects back to the source. And again, even though I'm using Excel, it could have been Oracle, it could have been SQL Server or Sybase or anything else you want, doesn't matter. And it makes this connection and it gets the data. But you remember we were talking a second ago that I wanted to transform the data. What Power Query does is when it gets the data, it creates its own data cube locally to me, the user. So in other words, if I'm working on my desktop and I run Power Query, Power Query will create a data cube in my desktop environment. It pulls the data from the enterprise database and gives me my own copy. And this is really important because it allows me now to go transform the data in the data cube without affecting anyone else inside the environment. So if I click one more time, I now, by the way, I want to share this out with Shannon because she's my boss. When I save the file format, it's called PBIX. That's the default format that Power BI saves in. Don't get messed up by this. A PBIX is a zip file. It's just a compressed folder. It literally is a zip file. And if you were to open it, you would see all the charts and graphs and stuff that you can make in Power BI, and you'd see all the data from Power Query that made those graphs. So it not only gives you the charts and the reports, but it gives you the data that created it. Now this is huge because back in this original traditional world, let's say Mark makes a report for Shannon, he gives Shannon the report, Shannon has a live feed back to the corporate data. And if this corporate data is constantly updating 100 times or 1,000 times a day, her report is constantly changing as she gets it. That's different than the way we're doing it in the Power BI model. Because I'm pulling the data in Power Query and making a data cube, and then I'm handing that data cube to Shannon when I share the file, she gets the data exactly as I saw it when I created the report. Now, yes, you can hit the refresh button and I can go back into the enterprise data and I can refresh all my data and pull the latest, but that doesn't happen automatically. It allows you to take a snapshot of the data so that when I hand it to my management or I give it to my executives or whatever, they're seeing exactly what I saw when I generated the report. So Power Query keeps track of all the changes that I make. So if I start renaming things and whatnot, it builds a list. I'll show you that in a second. And then it allows me to name or change or transform my data in any way, and it remembers what the original source is like, and it'll transpose those back and forth as it refreshes the data without ever changing the master database, okay? So the pro developers love this because there's no way now Mark can screw up my enterprise database. He doesn't have the rights. He has read privileges, so he can pull it and put it in his own data cube and mess with that all he wants to, but he cannot interfere with the master database. And this solves that whole problem. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood this, and I'm going to show this to you live. And as I said, when Mark shares the report, Shannon gets everything, the report and the data that created the report, and allows to pull this data. Not only Power Query can do this for Power BI, but it does it for Excel and everything else in the Microsoft ecosystem. Okay, any questions on that? I'm a little worried. We got 21 of you on the call, and I don't have a lot of questions, so make sure you're following along. If this is making sense, just put it in chat.
I just tested the chat.
Okay, just want to make sure. Hey, I found the chat button, so there we go. Let's go back and show you now live demo. So again, I'm going to hop out here. So I'm in Power Query. I'm outside of Power BI, and I want to make changes. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, this table is called the relational table. I don't want that. Doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm just going to rename this to the sales table. Now remember, in the traditional way, if I had done that against my SQL Server or against Oracle, I could potentially blow up a lot of stuff because I just renamed an entire column. But that's not the case. I'm only renaming it on my data cube, so it has no impact back to the original source. By the way, I'm sure some of you are going to ask, could you make Power BI run against the source without building the data cube? The answer is yes, but it doesn't do that by default. By default, it'll create its own separate data cube. There's pluses and minuses to that. The biggest plus, the biggest minus is obviously, I don't want to pull the entire enterprise data, all 32 terabytes of data. I can't do that because Power BI has some limitations on size. But it's better to pull my part of the query that I want. I just want to look at the United States sales. I don't need the whole world sales. I just want to look at Texas, or I just want to look at these divisions or whatever. That's where Power BI really accelerates and gives you these data cubes that are kind of subsets of your large enterprise data. So I just renamed this table from sales, or from relational to sales. I also have down here a column, the sales ID, and that's very misleading. This isn't the sales ID. This is supposed to be the sales rep ID, but they never changed it in our corporate data. I'm going to change it now. So I right click and I say, please rename this to sales rep ID, sales rep ID. Now I want you to watch what happens when I hit enter. You're going to notice right here, there's a column called applied steps. I hope you can see that. I know it's kind of small on this big monitor. But when I hit enter, watch what happens. I say enter, and suddenly this new addition was added in, rename columns. I can even take this sales rep ID and I'm going to change the order. I'm going to drag it all the way up to the front. And when I drop it, again, another feature came in, reordered column. So I renamed it, then I reordered it. What's going on? Microsoft has a macro recorder basically that's going on, that's recording every single step I'm doing to transform my data, okay? This is different than like an Excel macro recorder. This is much more advanced. And we won't get into the in-depths of it, but I want you to see what this is. If I want to see this, I can click on the advanced editor button right here on the home screen, and this is going to display out something called M code. M is in Mary, the letter M. So M is in Mary, M code. This is writing out all these changes that I'm making as kind of this macro recorder. Now remember, low code, no code, you're not, you don't have to know all the code languages and stuff. That's not the point. But if you do, or if you're familiar with Excel and VBA and whatnot, you can almost read this directly and see exactly what's going on, right? I renamed the column, I took column and I changed the type from sales ID to sales rep ID. If I wanted to, I could actually edit this code and say, this is Mike's sales rep ID. So I just typed it in right here. And when I say I'm done, watch what happens. Oh, of course, because it says it's not in the table. My bad. I don't know what I was doing there. I can go back in and make changes to that. Let's put that back. The reason why is I defined sales rep ID up here in an earlier line, and then I tried to call it something different. But you can go change this in any way, shape, or form that you want. Even better than that is once I get this done, I can copy and save this. Now, let me give you a true story. Let me get this back to the way it was. There we go. And I worked at Microsoft. I was the Central Region Controller when I was doing the national seminar team. I actually did reporting for all of the United States. And every single month, I had to present a report to the executives of Microsoft, directly to Bill Gates, directly to the executive board, telling them how these seminars were going. I did this for about 12 years. For the longest time, I had to, and some of you will appreciate this, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I had to go out and I had to transform the data. The data came from Microsoft Sales. It was totally messed up. Different regions were screwed up and the way they reported. And I would spend 2 weeks working to get this data to look and be correct. And once I got it correct, I'd take the last 2 weeks of the month and I'd build my fancy analysis and reporting. And this was great. When I got done, I had these beautiful charts and beautiful graphs. Bill Gates liked it so much, he actually wrote about this in his best-selling book, Business at the Speed of Thought. So my team is chapter 2, and he uses the data that I'm talking about that I used to prep for him. We built this financial model that he likes and he describes in there. The point being is I've done this in the real world, and it takes about 2 weeks to get the data prepped, and then it takes 2 weeks to get it done. And then as soon as the report's delivered and everyone woohoo applauds and gee, this is great. And then now the new data rolls in and I got to do it all over again. Another 2 weeks of pulling in the new month's data and prepping it and getting it ready. And then 2 weeks of an analyst, throw it back, start it over. And it was just killing. It's a huge, huge drain on energy and resources and whatnot. I am not lying to you when I say this, and I'm not embarrassed to say this. When I discovered this feature, I literally cried because of the amount of time it saved. Because watch what happens. Imagine I've been working for 2 weeks, and I've showed you just a couple of easy ones, renaming columns and moving stuff, but I could make entirely new measures and calculations. I can put in DAX expressions. I could do all kinds of amazing stuff to get the data exactly the way I want to see it. And once I do, I just go up here and I copy this data source. And once I have a copy, let's say I put it over in Notepad or I email it to myself or whatever, it's just text. Once I do that, I'm going to wipe this out. This will give me an error, but just to show you, everything's wiped out. It's done. I'm now starting over from scratch. I just delivered my report to the executives. I just spent 2 weeks getting that data correct. Now the new data starts coming in. Instead of taking another 2 weeks to do that data prep process again, I load up Power BI, I click the advanced editor, and I go to that text that I have in my email or from my notepad or whatever the case may be, and I simply paste. And the second I paste, I hit done, and boom, all the data is instantly reformatted, recolumnized, reset back the exact way I want it to be, but now it has the new month's data rolling in on top of it. That just saved me 2 weeks worth of work by standardizing that format, copying that text, and pasting it back in. This is called M-Code, and it's incredibly powerful. M-Code allows you to manage the data itself, the data tables, and massage them and transform them however you want. And once you get it down, save that query, and then just reapply it. And you can do it month after month after month. This is incredibly powerful. And hopefully you all, some of you may be weeping right now because you've been through what I've been through, where it just takes forever to get this data prepped and ready to go. Now I can do it with full automation using this M-Code. And by the way, how much code have I written? 0. I just told it what I want. I made it look the way I needed it to be. And then I just copied that whole piece of text out and I just paste it back in every time I want to use this thing. So this is what we're talking about, low code, no code. There's no programming going on here. Once I get this all set and done, I'm going to say close and apply. And you'll see that what it's doing now is it's going to show me line by line as it's bringing this data in. It's making the data cube and it's connecting it to Power BI. The data doesn't live in Power BI, it's connected back to the data cube, and that's where the data stays, but I can make these visuals that I talked about. So it can pull this stuff together. So it's making the imports, it's getting all these connections done. It now says it's loaded. And I know this worked because now to the far right, you'll see the field section. And if I click on colors and reps and sales, notice this used to be called relational, now it's called sales. It's all here. If I go to stores, it's all here. If I were to open up that Excel file, or again, this is a SQL Server, if I were to go open an instance of SQL Server, I wouldn't see it called the sales table. It would still be called the relational, because that's what the original was. My data cube changed, and Power Query remembers, oh yeah, sales is actually called relational. So when I go to refresh this data, it can refresh without any problems. I'll do that right now. I'll go ahead and hit the refresh button. It would go back to my original source. Again, this could be an Oracle database or whatever I want to. And it remembers those translation changes that happen, or transformation changes, and it automatically pulls the old data, reapplies all that formatting that I have, and instantly updates it into my new Power BI set. Okay, so I'll give it just a second to finish this up. There it goes. Now, there's one more thing I have to do, and I'm not going to waste your time. Remember that Excel is a flat file database, and I need to hook it together to be a relational database. If you're already using a relational database, any of the major brands, most of them are already relational anyway. You don't have to worry about this step. But for Excel, you do want to go in and double check how all this stuff is plugged together and working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the relationship tab. This is the model icon that you see on the far left here. And I'm just going to tell it I want to manage these relationships. I want to make sure they're set. I do know there's an error. And just so you know, when I created this sample file, I purposely made it create this error so I could teach classes how to fix it. I'm not going to worry about it now. I want the colors ID to be related to the color ID table. I want the rep ID to be related to the rep ID table. So rep ID to sales rep ID. Remember, we changed that name. So I'll say okay. And this last one I think should be fine. Sales store ID to store ID. Okay. So again, I'm just speeding through that because I don't want to waste time showing you something you probably already know anyway. But this is how we make these relationships connected. Once I have all this done, and I know that was a lot, I can now, and I recommend, once we get this set, go out and save this file. So I say save, and I'm going to call this webinar. And you'll notice by default, it's going to save as a PBIX. Again, that means that any reports and charts and graphs I build are instantly going to be saved along with the entire data cube that gave me all that great data information. Okay, and so we have this applied back over. I'm going to call it webinar, and when this gets saved as a file format, like any one of these that you see here, I save it, I can now hand this off to someone else on my team, and they get it all. They get the data and the reports, and they can go in, assuming they have proper licenses, and they can go create a lot of stuff. Okay, show me low code, no code. That's what this whole thing's about. Well, now that I have these tables imported from the data cube, and now I have, I should say linked to the data cube, and now I have them related together, it basically treats all of these tables, these are 4 separate tables, as if they were one massive Excel spreadsheet. So think of it as all the tables have their data related together, so it's one table with every one of these columns laid out. It's not an efficient way, that's why we don't use flat file. We use relational tables, but now I can treat them as if they were just one big sheet. So what does that mean? I'm going to start analyzing millions of data in seconds. I pick the visual that I want. So up here are my visuals. I want to see a line chart, for example. It's just giving me a placeholder, and I can drag and drop these out. If you're familiar with pivot tables, this works exactly the same way. I always start with, well, what is it I'm looking for? I'm looking for the prices that I sold these shoes at. So I'm going to drag these in here, and you'll notice it gives me a single dot. Now this is how many years? 7 years of data on sales of stores, 16 different stores, 7 years of collected data, and it's giving me 1.87,645,000, blah, 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 blah. So it's summarizing everything as one. Well, that doesn't help me much. One dot isn't going to work well. So it's asking me, well, what are you trying to do this for? And that's what's called the legend. The legend breaks it apart by different types, styles, etc. So I'm going to go to another table down here, this one that has all my store listings, and the names of my stores are called current stores. And I'm going to drag that and I'm going to throw that into the legend. And now each of my stores, excuse me, is summarized as a dot, right? And you say, well, why? Why is it not a line chart? Because I haven't told it over what period of time I want to see this. So I first took, what's the value? I want the sales. You want the sales for what? For all the stores. So I dragged in the stores. The last thing to do is to tell it across this x-axis, I want to see all the stores by some kind of date time thing. And sure enough, I have sales date here. So I'm going to add sales date to the x-axis. And there it is. And you say, wow, that is not very helpful. It's a big mash of colors. Part of the reason it's a big mash of colors is because Microsoft has it automatically figured out. If you give me a date, I can break that date down by year, quarter, month, and day, okay? And you say, oh, well, that's obvious. Well, no, it isn't, because if I go back to the table itself and I look at that sales date column from the sales table, and I look at sales date, you'll notice that I don't have a column called month. I don't have a column called quarter or day or anything else. It's automatically taken this, and by itself, it's subdivided it out into these logical pieces of information. So you see, this is called the hierarchy: the year, the quarter, the month, and the day. And right now I'm at the bottom of the hierarchy, meaning I'm looking every single day for every single store. By the way, before we get too far into this, I can instantly see some interesting anomalies, right? Again, you're looking at 1 million rows of data, 1 million pieces of data, and suddenly I'm like, what is going on this particular January 7th of Q1? Sales went through the roof. They're way out of the norm. I also have some weird stuff going on here, 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 and here. And if I look, this is what, April of 2011. This one is April of 2012. This one is April of, oh, that's still 2012. So if you keep looking, every April, this particular store in Boston suddenly has these huge spikes in sales. So I'm starting to see anomalies, even though it's kind of all munged together. Well, Microsoft gives you these abilities to move up and down the hierarchy. So right now you'll notice the hierarchy is year to quarter to month to day. If I use these little icons to drill up and drill down inside the hierarchy, since I'm on day, if I move up, it's going to move from day to month, from month to quarter, quarter to year. So watch what happens as I move up. If I now go to month, I'm now looking at all of the months. Watch what happens as I move from 2010 to 2011. It goes January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and now I start over in January. So I have 12 different subdivisions I'm seeing every single month. And again, just looking at this, you immediately see some funky stuff happening. What's going on with this massive dip right here on this first one? This is an anomaly that I might not be able to find if I'm looking at a bunch of data and tables, but when I see it in a graphical format, I totally understand. I'm also looking at these peaks that came up that we saw earlier in Boston. Clearly, huge jumps that keep happening around the April timeframe in Boston. Something weird's going on in Boston. I see some huge drops here. So these are anomalies that I might want to investigate, because I promise you, if I showed you this to the executives, those would be the first questions. Why did it drop? Why did it plummet in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia in Q1 of March? Maybe I go up the hierarchy one more. Remember, now I'm going to go from months to quarter. And when I go up the hierarchy, it gets a little easier to see, but I don't have quite as much detail. I still see this huge drop. I see a huge drop here and another huge drop here. So I can move the time scale up and down to get some details. If I go all the way up to the top to the year, you'll notice this doesn't look like that big of a drop, right? Because it's just summarizing the entire year altogether. What does that mean? That means as I move from 2010, instead of having 12 subdivisions, the snap is now jumping in entire years. If I drill back down the hierarchy, now it's moving in quarters. So I should have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and back to the next year. Okay. So this is how Power BI takes millions of records and allows you to visually analyze them, where I can quickly see something strange is happening right here. Show you just a couple more things. There's so much more to show on Power BI. By the way, I do have a class that I teach. I teach both intro, intermediate Power BI, and I also teach another class that's intermediate, advanced Power BI. These are full day, 8-hour hands-on sessions. I'm not trying to put a shameless plug. Yeah, I guess I am trying to put a shameless plug. But if your organization needs help in understanding this, boy, we can help out. But here's the cool thing about Power BI. Every control, these are the controls that I add to this, are interrelated. So I'm going to show you one of my favorites. It's called the slicer. I click in an empty space, I click on the slicer, and boom, it pops up. I can resize it, I can move it, I can reshape it however I want to. And the slicer takes one value, and it basically says, how do you want to slice this data? I want to slice this data by current store. And so now you'll notice I have a checkbox here for all the different stores. And if I say only show me Dallas, only show me Las Vegas. Wow, what happened in Las Vegas? It just dropped off the face of the earth. Only show me, what was it, Philadelphia had that huge drop. Yep, there's Philadelphia. I can even hold my control key down and say, show me Portland, Philadelphia, and Seattle on the same graph. So by holding control, I can have multiple ones and put this in. I can even put in multiple slicers and multiple pieces of data. Let me put in a pie chart. This pie chart, I want to see this data, but I want to see it by gender. So what is it I'm looking for? Again, I'm looking for that sales price of the shoes. And how do I want to break them apart? I'm going to break them apart by gender. And so right now it tells me the number of women's shoes, girls' shoes, men's shoes, and boys' shoes. And because I'm filtering for Philadelphia, Portland, and Seattle, I'm only seeing that data for Philadelphia, Portland, and Seattle. Watch what happens when I take these off. I just click on them. And now notice that this chart changed, and it's now showing all the stores. If I click on Miami, watch the pie chart, and you'll see it instantly changed its numbers. So it's only showing me Miami and Louisville and Los Angeles and whatever. So everything I put on here is interrelated to everything else, even to the point where, let's say I'm looking at Las Vegas and I only want to look at women's shoes. I can click on the women's pie piece and watch what happens to my chart above. It also changes, and it's only showing me Las Vegas women's shoes now. So I can keep adding and adding and adding and putting as many objects on this screen as I need to, and all of them are interrelated. Because we don't have enough time, unfortunately, today to get even further into this, I want to show you what one looks like when it's all said and done. So I pre-created one. I am doing a webinar, free webinar session to teach you how to build these beautiful dashboards that I'm about to show you. By the way, as this is loading, one other thing, because I'm not primarily a training organization, but we do offer extensive training. I've been doing training for 30 years. So I don't want you to think we're not trainers. We are, but it's not our primary focus. I go out and I look out on the web and I watch YouTube videos, and I always credit back when I find someone that does an amazing job. This dashboard looks very similar to someone I found out on YouTube. And when I do this session where I teach you how to create beautiful visual dashboards like this, I will give you the link and you can watch that person. You kind of get the best of my knowledge as I learn from others. I share that with you as well. So it's not just always me. I'll point you to some really cool, really good stuff. This is what a dashboard looks like when you really get going. Notice down the far side, I have all these different filters or slicers in here. If you tell me I want to look at just women's shoes, or let's do women's and girls. I'm going to hold down the control key. So female shoes. Notice all my data is constantly updating. And then I say, show me all female shoes that were either gray or purple. And I want shoes that had a style that were in 4-inch heels. And I want them to be a type of platform shoe. And I want them to, and I could just keep going in certain sizes. I want only sizes between a 6, 6.5, 7, and a 7.5. And every single time I'm clicking, it's going through a million pieces of data and it's recasting this analysis and showing me live what these different divisions did. I could just look down at this table and I know my Northeast killed it in 2019. They had a huge amount of sales of these specific shoes. And in the Southwest, I had a really bad year where we only sold 146 shoes in 2001. So again, I can immediately see my anomalies. What hours did customers come in to buy these shoes? So I know that generally around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock noon is when they often came in to buy them. So all this data is instantly getting updated and I can take it on or put it off. So here's where this is going, and this comes back to the report writing. This is why Microsoft is pushing this as its core report writing service. And I say pushing this, I need to clarify, they're not taking away SQL Server reporting services. You still have that if you want to use it. But Microsoft knows eventually, once you learn all that Power BI can do, you're going to make the change because it's so much more extensive than what you've previously been able to do. But anyway, I want to show you, once I have this, I get it all designed. I've got it exactly the way I want to see it. I'm going to, again, take these filters off so that they get to see all the information. Now, you don't have to, but I'm going to put these back to all. By taking them off, you'll notice that it defaults and puts that in. One more to do here. Now I've got it back the way I want it. I'm now going to share this with my executive. And I even wrote a little executive summary down here talking about the goals and where we came in on a shortfall and what to really look at. Because I found these anomalies in here and I want to point them out to my exec. Remember that if I did this in the traditional model, because it's live connected to the source data, by the time I send it to my boss, and my boss may not check it till tomorrow, the data is all changed. Not the case in Power BI. It's going to save the data itself, and the data won't change until we go out and refresh it. So all I have to do, I can say file save, and you saw I can save as a PBIX, but better than that, I can go in and I can publish this. So I'm going to click on publish. It says, do you want to save your changes? I will say yes. I will go to my workspace. Now I could do this to a SharePoint site. I could put it out on a report server. It says, hey, I've already got one out there. Do you want me to copy over that? I'll say yes. So what it's doing is it's taking this and it's publishing it out on the web to people that I will allow to have access to, okay? And you can put controls over who can see it and who can work with this and who can get into it. I have a bunch of AI stuff. We'll cover that when I do my AI session on this, but I'm just going to show you, if I click this link, it's going to open my browser. So I'm now in my browser. And when the browser comes up, it's loading the data from the data cube, and I send this link to my boss. I share this out with my boss or my executives by clicking the share button, and they will come to this web page on any device. It could be an Apple device, it could be an Android device, it could be a desktop or tablet or whatever. It doesn't matter. And when they come out here, they have full control over this, so they can interact, they can change the data, they can do all the things, they can see exactly what I'm talking about. They can go page by page. Notice I've got a breakdown by store. There's a little bit different view. I've got certain regions in here. Here's a white version of it, just a different look. Just kind of cool how it has the shading and stuff. And every one of these is dynamic. If I look at the work shoes here and I click, all the data updates. And by the way, something really funky is happening right there. There's a data anomaly for work shoes, right? I click off it, or I just want to see the men's shoes, and all the data is being reflected. This is now published out, it's live, it's dynamic, and anyone who I give this link can go in and start clicking through these different groups and regions. I can make interactive buttons, so I can jump back and forth between sections and reports. I can build any type of visual that I want to. That's why Microsoft is moving this to be the report tool for all future generations. They're not there yet. They're heading in that direction, is absolutely their stated direction to get there. They need to do some work on paginated reports. That's if I want to print them out on paper. They do have a version, paginated reports, that works in Power BI. It's horrible. I don't like it. It takes a lot of work. It's not only coding, but it's extensive coding to get that thing to work right. And they're going to improve it. That's what those 300 developers are cranking on and working on. And I'm sure in future iterations soon, that'll be replaced with a much, much easier tool to use. When that happens, I think that's when Microsoft will officially come out and say, hey, this is your report tool from now on. Why? Because I did everything that you just saw me do without writing a single line of code. Your business development people can learn how to build dashboards just like I'm doing here without knowing a single bit of programming. They can make it look the way they want to. They can get it all together. They get about 90% of the way there. In some cases, they could actually do it themselves. In other cases, they might need that 10% of the development team to come in and kind of fix something or write some DAX code or make some stuff work. But that's what we're talking about with this concept of low code, no code. And you're kind of seeing it right here as it comes out and makes itself available. So really, that's the core of what I wanted to show you today. We went a whole 90 minutes and you all didn't ask a single question, which worries me. But I'm going to finish up with this slide.